Hello and welcome to the Elections Arena. Joining us in the arena today are Dr. Martin Sherman, Director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies, and via Skype from the Knesset, Rabbi Dov Lippman, former member of Knesset for Yesh Atid and Senior Manager of Community Outreach for Honest Reporting. So, it's been a week since Israel went to the polls to decide who will head the next government, but we still don't have any answers as neither the Likud or Blue and White, the two major parties, were unable to secure a majority of 61. Now, despite this, neither Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu nor Blue and White head Benny Gantz are backing down, each calling to form a broad unity government. But one major historic development this week, the Israeli-era parties, the Joint List Party, for the first time since Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin decided to recommend Benny Gantz as a Prime Minister. Let's take a look.
שגם רוב הציבור הישראלי אמר את דברו. רוב הציבור הישראלי אמר לא לשלטון בנימין נתניהו. אני חושב שזה הדבר המכריע שעומד בפנינו היום. לכן לגבי ההמלצה שלנו, אנחנו בדרך כלל לא ממליצים. לכן אין ספק שיש פן היסטורי במה שאנחנו עושים עכשיו. אנחנו רוצים לשים קץ לעידן בנימין נתניהו. לכן אנחנו נמליץ על בני גנץ להרכיב את הממשלה הבאה. תודה.
So indeed an historic announcement, but before we get into things, Rabbi Lippman, can you give us a brief overview of what's going to come in the next couple of weeks?
Absolutely. All we have right now is 120 members of the Knesset. That's the election results given us. In order to form government, one of those 120 has to find a way to find 61 seats, a majority in the Knesset, to surround him in a governing coalition. And the process has finished where the parties come to the President of Israel with their recommendations, and every party has come, and at the moment, nobody has a clear path towards those 61 mandates, not Netanyahu or Gantz. Netanyahu is sitting at 55, Gantz is sitting at 54. We have 11 non-recommendations out there. By the end of this week, President Rivlin is going to choose someone to try to form a government. As far as all people can tell, that will be Netanyahu. Netanyahu has already said today, or hinted to the fact, that he won't take the full 28 days that he usually has to try to form a government, but he'll quickly come back to the president and say, I don't have the 61, and try to put the onus onto Gantz. Gantz will try to find 61. Again, he's starting with just 54 recommendations, but even less for a government. Because, Lidar, you mentioned the Joint Arab List recommended Gantz for prime minister, but they're not going to join with his government. And therefore, Gantz is actually in the low 40s. He has to find almost 20 more seats. He's probably not going to find that from the Likud-led right-wing bloc, and therefore we'll be back to a stalemate again. And at that point, anything is open, with the possibility of us even heading to another election because no one succeeded in the coming months in forming a government.
So, Dr. Sherman, quite a mess that we have on our hands.
Indeed.
Do you agree with Rabbi Lippman that we might be headed towards a third election?
Well, I think it's something that can't be discounted. I think it's certainly a tangible possibility. I think there's going to be great pressure on the parties not to let that happen. I think Lieberman is going to be subjected to huge pressure from various sources to come back into the fold of the right wing. Because basically, when you look at the elections, it was a huge failure for the left and the non-Netanyahu or the anti-Netanyahu camp. Because look what was ranged against Netanyahu. He had three parties joining together in one, Blue and White. He had four former chiefs of staff against him, three in Blue and White and one in the Democratic in the Democratic movement, or whatever they call it, with Ehud Barak. He had basically a vitriolic mainstream media against him, and a transparent attempt at a legalistic coup to try and displace him from office, not through the polls. And still, he won a clear majority in the Zionist sector of the Jewish electorate, and probably many of the Liebermans electorate wouldn't mind supporting him. Although I think Lieberman, the strange thing about this election is that the party that deserved to be punished most for precipitating these elections was the party that was most rewarded, Lieberman, because we're only in these elections because Lieberman reneged on his pledges to help establish a right-wing coalition, And I think all his new Alakites are people who've put anti-Haredi opprobrium ahead of political integrity. So there are a lot of paradoxes that have led up to this, and perhaps one of the biggest paradoxes is that Lieberman, who's always taken up a very strong, abrasive, demanding tone towards the Israeli Arabs, has actually empowered them, because he not only created the joint list by raising the threshold level and forcing to do it, he recreated it after not allowing a government to be formed in the last elections, and in the September elections, the joint list reorganized and ran as a joint list, making them now the third largest party. And this is all thanks to Lieberman, and that's one of the paradoxes.
So, Rabbi Lippman, Dr. Sherman is saying that this is not necessarily a win for the left, but rather that Netanyahu did manage to maintain his lead. What are your thoughts on this?
Many would strongly disagree, and I'm not taking sides in this discussion, but many would say that Netanyahu started this election at 35 seats with Likud. He added the 4 seats of Moshe Kahlon's Kulanu party. That should take him, in theory, to 39. He joined in Moshe Feiglin's Zehut party with a few seats, and that should take him over 40. And this party only won 31 seats, and therefore there was no clear statement in support of Netanyahu. In fact, many would say it was a loss. And by the way, it's not just me saying that. I'm here in the Knesset today, and you hear the talk and the noises in the Likud party where they realize that this was a setback. That's why Likud is even considering, they've called for a unity government with Gantz. There are even voices in Likud saying, let's give Gantz the first time in a rotation if we do a rotation of Gantz and Netanyahu. You wouldn't hear that kind of talk if it was a clear victory for Likud. However, they do still feel they're in the best place to try to form the coalition. I would agree with Dr. Sherman that the wild card here is certainly Lieberman, and it could be that if we're on the cusp of a third election, perhaps something can be worked out, bridge the gap between Lieberman and the ultra-Orthodox parties, and maybe that's the way to pave a way forward. The other possibility is the president tonight is sitting with Gantz and Netanyahu together. Perhaps the requirement or the demand that Gantz has made that Netanyahu step down because of his legal issues, maybe they'll find a way to bridge the gap and say, let's start working together. And if there's an indictment, perhaps it changes, or we have to see exactly what happens after the Prime Minister's hearing. But there's no doubt that from all sides, we are hearing that there has to be some kind of a breakthrough. But for that breakthrough to happen, people have to come off the trees which they climbed up to and also renege somewhat on election promises. That's not a first time in Israel for that to happen. And people will say, because of emergency circumstances, we had no choice but to do X, Y, or Z to make sure that we don't go to a third election.
I mean, let's talk a little bit about Avigdor Lieberman here, the head of Israel Beitenu. He's clearly come out as the kingmaker in this election. He said that he is not going to recommend neither Gantz nor Netanyahu, which means that neither has the 61 seats. What's his endgame here? Is he really going to drag the country to a third round of elections? I can't imagine that that would be good for him.
I don't know. I mean, I find it very difficult to interpret Lieberman's behavior, because he's past is strewn with all sorts of shady deals with the Haredim. He's for 20 years, and he's been in politics. He's always been with the politics. I think, because in the last elections, he was pretty close to not getting through the threshold. I think he was looking for a new card, and he's embraced this. And a lot of people have, I think, fallen for it. I don't really think that Lieberman is really so anti-Haredi, and I think a lot of pressure will be put on him for this. But I think, talking about the Arab parties, I think it's really time that we reconsider the eligibility of these parties for the elections, because when you look at the basic law Knesset, the letter of the law says that if you do not accept Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, you can't run for the Knesset. And none of these Arab parties accept Israel as the Jewish state. Therefore, by the letter of the law, they should be disqualified from running, and which will make them, the right wing, the clear winner. Because if you look at the joint list, it's an amalgam of very disparate components. You have communists and Islamic extremists and nationalists. The only common thread is that they deny the existence of Israel as a nation state of the Jewish people, which by law should be enough to disqualify them.
So, Rabbi Lippman, Dr. Sherman is saying that we should disqualify the Arab parties from the Knesset.
I know the law says that, not me.
So
What are your
I
thoughts?
think that a large consensus in Israel would agree with that. And I want to clarify, because people are watching and might misunderstand. No one is saying disqualify Arabs from being part of the Knesset or running for the Knesset.
Right.
In fact, Prime Minister Netanyahu himself said, and other representatives have said, we would welcome Arab ministers in our government. But it's Arab ministers, Arab citizens of Israel, who accept the fact that they're living in a Jewish and democratic state. And by the way, there are many, many Arabs living in Israel who are upstanding citizens who feel that way. We have to find a way to empower them and let them be the representatives in the Knesset. But I would agree that if we have Arab members of Knesset, and I sat here in this building hearing them say things totally against the existence of the Jewish state, I find it very troubling that they have this level of representation. And it is something that has been tried. Many elections, many parties, including from the center left, have actually joined with efforts to eliminate some of these parties from running, not because they're Arab, but because they don't accept Israel as a Jewish state. And there's no doubt that it's something which has to be strongly explored. If I can weigh in for a moment on Lieberman, what you were just talking about, Lieberman is basically saying two things. One is it's a strategic way for him to give his party growth, and he has grown as a result of this strong stance against the Haredim. But there is some truth to what he's saying as well, without the anti-Orthodox rhetoric. He is saying, I'm looking at the future of the country, and the ultra-Orthodox population is growing in huge numbers, and no one is giving them general studies and the basic tools that need to be part of Israeli society. If I can be the one to force a unity government of Likud, blue and white, and either with or without Israel Beitenu, but a government which is not beholden to all the demands of the ultra-Orthodox, perhaps that could set the country on the right path when it comes to the issue of the integration of the ultra-Orthodox into Israeli society. So I would agree with some of what his goals without the rhetoric behind it. Let the rhetoric be positive about giving them livelihood, giving them an education, giving them the opportunity to pursue their dreams while being religious, but not turn it into talk of a possible theocracy and all kinds of other scare tactics, which aren't the true intentions of the ultra-Orthodox parties. So this is, again, a place where there could be a breakthrough. Perhaps some kind of an agreement could be made on those issues. Maybe Lieberman could be the kingmaker to then bring us to a right-wing religious government.
Mm-hmm. And perhaps one of the greatest ironies in these elections is that Blue and White, a party headed by 3 former chiefs of staff, requires the support of the Arab parties who deny the existence of Israel and negate everything that they basically fought for their whole life, which is, I think, quite telling.
Right, so we've made this important distinction. Now, Israeli Arabs came out in record numbers, I think, to vote this election. I think we saw an increase of some 130,000 Israeli Arab voters who came out in this election versus the last election. How significant is it that the Israeli Arab parties did recommend Benny Gantz?
I think it's significant. I think it's a bit perverse. I mean, that shows, how the party is viewed. They feel that they can promote their anti-Zionist agenda more easily through Benny Gantz than they can through Netanyahu. Because, if you look at their demands, like, for instance, allowing free rein to illegal building in the Negev and in the Galilee, which basically means that you'll lose Jewish control of the Negev and the Galilee, or annulling the nationality bill, which basically means if you annul the nationality bill, you basically imperil the law of return, and many other things like that. So I think it says a lot about Blue and White as a political entity, that it's viewed as a potential collaborator with the Arab sector.
Okay, there's one final point I want to touch upon before we move on to our next topic. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, we can't ignore the fact that there is a looming indictment against him. And there's talk, we've heard a lot of talk in the Israeli media, that he will resign in exchange for the indictments being dropped. Rabbi Lippman, are you hearing this kind of talk in the Knesset? Is this something that's on the table?
There really is not significant discussion about this. Netanyahu seems convinced that once he goes to his hearing, that will somehow prove everyone wrong and he won't be indicted. If he's indicted, he's convinced he'll go to court and he'll be found innocent. He's not on that path. There are many from the outside who are saying, why wouldn't he just do that? He's been prime minister for many years. He's accomplished a tremendous amount for Israel. Why not sail off into the sunset and not have to deal with the legal woes? But at the moment, he seems to be very much digging into his heels, and he's not planning on going anywhere. Today, there was even talk of him saying that after all the recommendations are made and people try to form governments and no one accomplishes it, at that point he'll find a way to swoop in and find a way to break through. He's convinced that he's in this for the long run, and there's no indication at all of him looking for any kind of a plea agreement to try to avoid anything regarding his legal issues.
Okay, well, while we've been focusing internally, another important factor to take into consideration is how the Israeli election results will affect U.S.-Israel relations and Israeli deterrence against Hamas and Iran. Prime Minister Netanyahu has announced that he will not speak at the upcoming UN General Assembly at a critical time when the threat from Iran is only increasing. So how will this uncertainty about the country's future government affect Israel in the international arena? So what are your thoughts on this? Dr. Sherman, we'll start with you.
I think it's difficult to predict with any great accuracy. No one has Netanyahu's stature on the international stage. So if he is removed, I think it certainly will be a loss for Israel. I think the big unknown here also is the relationship with American Jewry, because I've never understood why liberal Jewry in America would be so anti-Netanyahu. After all, basically supporting the left-wing stance, which is for the establishment of a Palestinian state, is supporting the establishment of yet another homophobic, misogynistic, Muslim-majority tyranny, which seems to negate all the values invoked for its establishment. So I think it's, in many ways, I think that it's time for Israel to put its case much more forcefully in the domestic scene in the United States. I think there are many unknowns as to how Gantz or some other person would handle the international issues. I feel a bit uncomfortable about Gantz seeing his performances in this election. So I think there's a certain amount of concern.
Mm-hmm. Now, Rabbi Liebman, it's no secret that U.S. President Donald Trump and Netanyahu have been very close allies. They've had excellent relations. Are we going to see a cold draft coming in from Washington if, say, Gantz were to be prime minister?
I was actually very pleased when Trump was asked immediately after the election about if Netanyahu was in trouble, what does that mean? And his immediate response was that his relationship is with Israel. And I think that was, a lot of people were talking about that and even mocking it a little bit about, oh, Netanyahu lost, now he's moving on to the next person. I actually see that as a very positive statement where the relationship between the United States and Israel has to surpass the personalities that are involved. That's why it's always important to make it a issue which is which is bipartisan and not partisan in any way. And I actually do believe that the relationship will continue to be strong regardless of who's running Israel and whichever direction it goes. There's no doubt that Netanyahu has an incredible talent when it comes to making the case for Israel and presenting Israel on the international scene. But we've seen over and over again Israel's ability to reinvent itself regardless of who the leader is. And the bottom line relationships are with the state of Israel and the people of Israel. And therefore, I don't feel any concern whatsoever, both vis-a-vis the White House or any other issues on the international scene, regardless of who ends up leading Israel. I think we'll be in good shape with that.
Now, should we expect to see any new developments on the peace front? Will the election results affect this in any way?
Very difficult.
So that's the one area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Rabbi Liebman, go ahead.
That's the one area where the response from Israel could be different depending on if Gantz is prime minister or if Netanyahu is prime minister. Now, many on the right spent the elections painting Gantz as some kind of a huge leftist with all kinds of fears about what's going to happen. That's a lot of electioneering. You look at Blue and White. It has Moshe Ya'alon, who comes from the Likud party, and others who are staunchly in the right wing. And it's very much a mixture of factions there. So I don't think there's going to be any major changes in terms of policy, but there might be a difference in terms of a response. You could see Blue and White weighing some concessions more seriously than perhaps a Likud-led government government. Those are issues with, but again, any Gantz government is going to have to include strong elements from the right. It's going to have to be with a Likud. They want to have a Likud without Netanyahu, but it will still be Likud, and therefore there won't be any significant difference. And let's remember one more thing. There's another side that has to say yes to the deal. And the working assumption within the Israeli government system is that the Palestinian leadership will reject any deal that's made if it's not 100% of their demands, and therefore Israel's not going to really have much that it has to respond to anyway. So there is no major fear of what's looming over the horizon. A lot of words that we heard about that were really more politicking for elections and not reality in terms of what's going to happen.
Well, but it's not only that. There's also the problem with the Palestinians creating facts on the ground, building in Area C, illegal construction, etc., etc. The question is, Netanyahu hasn't always been that firm on these issues. The question is, will Gantz be even less firm? And he may well be, if he doesn't have strong right-wing partners in his coalition, which he well may not have.
All right. Well, that's all the time we have in the elections arena. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us and all of you, our viewers, for joining in. And remember to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News, on Twitter at ILTV News, and on our website at iltv.tv. I'm Ladar Gravelazi. Until next time.